What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined by my main man, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talker. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, we are 2 days through organized team activities. We got one more day this week and then 2 more weeks to round out OTAs. We got plenty of observations, starting with the quarterback. Obviously, the wide receivers are a big topic of conversation right now. Naji Harris, massive observation that I think we talk about every year, that this year I think we have to break down once again. And then, in the same conversation as many of these topics, as many of these takeaways, you have to talk about where the Pittsburgh Steelers need some help. And, well, we might have some options, or at least a new option, as we move through the week. And as always, we will answer all of your questions, so make sure that you toss those in the chat. We'll get to them at the end of the show. It's been a beautiful week here in the Berg. I'll tell you this. Over the last 2 days, I've introduced myself to every newcomer the Pittsburgh Steelers have signed. And it is very, very easy to pick up on certain observations. One, Justin Fields has the most miserable interview face I have ever seen in my entire life. Genuinely great guy. Talked to him for 2 days. Big smile. Was interested in my life. I was like, dude, you don't even know me, pal. You don't even, sometimes I'm the enemy. You don't want this. Great dude. Russell Wilson makes Calvin Austin look like a normal sized human being. Love Calvin Austin. Shout out my guy. And Patrick Queen doesn't care when you call him Roquan Smith, because I actually did that. Went up to him and said, Roquan, great to meet you. And he looked at me and I said, Patrick, great to meet you. I said, I'm so sorry. He said, yeah, that happens all the time. I was like, well, I'll try to stop doing that. But great guys. So far, 3 out of 3. We'll continue to make our way around the locker room. How you feeling, my friend?
I'm feeling good. Like you mentioned, the weather is starting to cooperate. I actually got to sit outside yesterday and have some pizza, drink some beers at a restaurant. It's always
Beautiful.
great whenever you get some patio weather at restaurants, because it's the best feeling in the world. But,
Yes.
all the videos coming out from OTAs are giving me life, even though it's still a couple months away till we get some NFL actual game action, even preseason action. But, some of these clips, it's fun to see like the new guys interacting, and it's fun to see like Russell Wilson. I think it was Broderick Jones who said, man, you're short. Is that why you take a 15-step drop? Like the guys interacting, seeing the new faces meshing. It's been a lot of fun this week.
Yeah, it really has. And just to get some football, I know you're not there, but we're sending you all the highlights. It's just nice, man. Like, it's just, you're sitting there, you're sweating a little bit. You're like, this is football, man. We're back. We're here. It's a slow process. This is a tease. I always tell people this is the tease, because in a month, it is the longest drought we go through the entire year. Nobody's around. There's no news. There's nothing to talk about, but we soak this in every second that we possibly can. And that break means that we're headed to Latrobe, which, you can never complain when you're headed to Latrobe. Through 2 days through OTAs, there is plenty to talk about. Obviously, Justin Fields kicked off the quarterback competition and said, this is real. I'm not in here to sit on the bench all season. I plan on playing, which, you took at first just as Justin Fields obviously is a competitor, and this is what you want him to say. If he came into the Steelers organization and said, yeah, I'm cool with being a backup, that's totally fine. I don't know what the outlook moving forward would be, but that's a massive conversation right now. Then we got the wide receivers, which I think is number 2 on the list, and we're going to dive into both of those. Let's start with Justin Fields and the quarterbacks. I'll say this. Justin Fields looks impressive. At times, you look at him and you say, that was a tough throw. You got to kind of overcome that. But at times, he does something crazy, and you go, okay, that was very impressive. That was something that Justin Fields could probably only do, is probably the only person who would pull something like that off. I think that's where I stand just 2 days in, and there's plenty to do, but just 2 days into organized team activities, I look at it and I say, if you're sticking with Russell Wilson, he's the safe bet. He's the guy that he looks like a 9-year vet. I don't know how impressive it is, but it's only 2 days. There hasn't been any like glaring, oh my gosh, this looks terrible. But at the same time, there hasn't been many, oh, that was awesome. That was super cool. Justin Fields, on the other hand, you have those moments where you're like, that wasn't great. But then you have those moments where you're like, that was crazy. That was cool. That was fun to watch. And I think when it comes to Justin Fields, my big question is what one is going to overshine the other. If Justin Fields does turn out to be your guy, can he make more wow plays than, that wasn't the right move play? That's the mistake. And I think everybody's kind of wondering the same question: is Justin Fields, is he good enough? Is he headed in the right direction? Does he have enough development left to overcome those big mistakes and those moments of, it shouldn't have done that. That wasn't the right move. And because on the other side of it, you got a playmaker. You got a dude. I mean, you walk up to him, he looks like Cam Newton. He's as big and as thick as Cam Newton, which was very impressive. And maybe it's just because, Russell Wilson is not a massive human being, and Kyle Allen kind of looks like Mitch Trubisky. So you're just looking there going, okay, two normal sized people. And then Justin Fields is standing there looking pretty impressive. But I just think that, you watch him, you look at him and you say, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think this guy's got more potential than anybody on this roster right now, which is impressive. Let me ask this. Do you judge it? And you haven't been there. I understand this, but do you judge it? Because I think I have an answer on my end. Do you judge Justin Fields off of the mistakes or the wows when you're looking at it and trying to say, okay, well, Russell doesn't give you the wows, but he also doesn't give you as many mistakes. Are you taking the wows or are you taking the comfort?
Well, I think the thing that you look at with Justin Fields is you knew the book on him coming in. The question is not about the wows, because you're going to get the wows. The question is, what's the nature of the mistakes? Is it mental? Is it physical? Is it something that can be worked out with Tom Arth and the Steelers training staff? Or is it something where it's going to be part of his game? You're going to have to live with it. Whether you like it or not, it's going to be part of his game. If it's something you can work out, then I'm willing to forego that. But I think at this stage of the offseason, you're looking for that, consistency, especially, as we'll talk about, breaking in a very new wide receiver core, a very, at certain levels, an experienced wide receiver core that are going to get some opportunities that they might not have gotten in the past. So I think for that, you want a little bit more consistency. And that's why I think throughout the offseason, you're going to see Russell Wilson get those first opportunities. And even if it is a QB competition, you're going to see Russell Wilson in that pole position, as Mike Tomlin likes to say, more often than not, because they're trying to, it's not just about the quarterbacks here. It's a lot about getting the entire offense to start to click on one path. And there's a lot of new faces on there. So I think with that, I would lean the consistency, especially early on here in the process.
Yeah, I think when it comes to pole position, who's in the leaderboard right now, I agree with you. I think I look at Russell Wilson and I say, look, you're just going to take comfort because that's easy. It's easier to adjust to these guys. You want to get a lot of guys rolling in a new offense. That's the thing. But I will say that Justin looks good enough right now and impressive enough and has those moments. I mean, I think he clearly won yesterday. Like, it's not a competition right now, but if you had to pick one, I think Justin had the better day yesterday. The way I look at Justin Fields is I didn't know if he was going to showcase enough compared to Russell Wilson that he would get an actual opportunity. We literally talked about this yesterday, where you looked at Justin Fields and you said you'd have to really ball out. You'd have to really showcase how impressive you could be to surpass Russell Wilson. It's only been 2 days, and I think I've already seen some of that. Like, I think I've seen Justin do some things where you're like, I don't know, man. If I'm watching that, if I'm the coaching staff, I'm looking at that going, tomorrow you're going to get a couple more reps with the first team. Tomorrow you might get an opportunity a little bit more than you had an opportunity today. I think Justin's done those things. And if that's only 2 days in, what comes in a week? What comes in a month? What comes once you put the pads on and you possibly have better wide receivers and you're more comfortable in the offense? When does all that start to play a factor? Because I think Justin has a real shot here. Like, it's nothing against Russ. And we're going to get to the wide receivers in a second. I honestly think Russ is playing with a massive handicap when it comes to his wide receiver cores. But I don't know, like when in the same conversation, in the same argument, if you are playing with such a significant disadvantage for pass catchers, you kind of want the guy out there that, okay, well, at least he could run around and make something. I mean, yesterday, and I'm not allowed to say this thing, so maybe I'm about to walk into camp and get in trouble here. But yesterday, Justin runs up and literally avoids a tackle, jumps in midair, throws it sideways, touchdown. And you're like, all right, that was wild. That shouldn't have happened, and it does. And sometimes you just need that, especially, like I said, if you're working with such a handicap, maybe having the guy who is just crazy on the field and does crazy things that shouldn't work is the way to go about it, compared to safe and reliable. And that kind of leads us to the wide receivers. I think if the Steelers wide receivers were better, this would be no issue. This would be Russell Wilson looks good. There's nothing to talk about. But I mean, the past 2 days, and again, it's only been 2 days, so I'm trying not to make rash decisions here or anything like that. I'm trying not to jump the gun, but you got to say what you've been seeing. And in 2 days, the biggest observation, hands down, is that the Pittsburgh Steelers desperately need a wide receiver. Desperately need a wide receiver. Like it is, Van Jefferson, I think, has dropped more passes than he has caught. Roman Wilson looks like a third-round rookie, doesn't look like a first-round. This guy was a massive steal, and I think he's got a ton of potential, but you're asking too much from a third-round rookie. My thing is, you look at a lot of throws from Russ, who's taken the first-team reps, and that throw goes incomplete, and you go, would he complete that if he had if a wide receiver not named Quez Watkins was the guy trying to catch that over Minka Fitzpatrick and Joey Porter Jr., would that be a completed pass? Because it wasn't intercepted. It was in a good spot, but Quez Watkins was trying to beat double coverage from two guys that are 15 times better than him. And that's where the Steelers are. Is Van Jefferson's not a starting wide receiver. Quez Watkins not a starting wide receiver. Calvin Austin's got potential, but that's all it is potential. You're literally banking off of George Pickens and a third-round rookie, and it has already shown that the Steelers desperately need a wide receiver. It's got to happen. I think that, all the talk about the trades and everything, like you didn't know if it was overhyped or whatever coming into this. 2 days, I could definitively say they are in a lot of trouble if they do not add a wide receiver.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, too, you and Steven talked about it yesterday, and it was essentially they look good coming off the bus, or at least they look better than we thought coming off the bus. But whenever you start getting into it and start seeing more and more reps and start seeing the intensity kind of rise, even from a day one OTAs to day two of OTAs, for that to be the one thing standing out, and that to be the one thing going into this that everybody was looking towards as being their biggest hole, it's just, the proof is in the pudding at that point. Now, again, it is only day two, so you don't want to make sweeping generalizations about, the state of the entire room for the entire season. But, I think everybody going into this saw that they need a little bit more talent there. It might not necessarily be they need a star, but they need a little bit more talent than what they have on the roster right now.
Yes, and to be honest, I think they need a significant boost. Like, it's not like I think potential, you could get somebody with potential who makes a significant boost. A John Mechie, I think, fits that bill, but I don't think you could go get a Noah Brown. I don't think you could go get I don't know what other names are just mediocre out there who are the wide receiver 3, but you can't go get that. You got to go get a wide receiver 2 because you don't have one. It's George Pickens and that's it. And it's hard to judge the other side. Like, it's hard to judge a guy like Dante Jackson and Joey Porter Jr.'s growth and Deshaun Elliott, because you're looking at it and you're going, yeah, that was good. That looked really good against Scotty Miller. It looked great, and that's just not, it's not competition. That you're trying to feed competition. You're trying to build. That's what made Joey Porter Jr. great, is he went every day against George Pickens and got outmatched every day against George Pickens. And this year, Roman Wilson's going to go against Joey Porter Jr. and he's going to get outmatched by Joey Porter Jr. all the time. But you got nobody else to challenge anybody. You have nobody on the wide receiver core except for George Pickens to challenge a Dante Jackson, to challenge a Deshaun Elliott or an Anthony Everett, or, you know what I mean? Like, George isn't going to play the slot. You have no idea how good a guy like Beanie Bishop is when he's going against, Connor Hayward or Scotty Miller or whoever. Those are not guys that you're looking at and saying, well, he looked really good against a guy who wasn't on a team a week ago, and there was a reason for that. That's where the Steelers are. That's hands down the biggest question right now. Is coming into this, you kind of hope that the wide receivers look good and that they would impress you more than they were. And me and you have had conversations. Maybe George just looks unreal, and that's good enough. And maybe Roman Wilson is good enough as a wide receiver too. And then you're banking on Pat Freiermuth. I think Pat looks good. I think Pat could have a big year. I think George looks like George Pickens, and I think in a real offense, he's going to be unbelievable. But there's nobody else, and eventually teams are just going to double team George Pickens, and that's it. Who are you throwing the ball to? Roman Wilson, who's getting covered, who can't beat coverage. You're throwing it to Quez Watkins, Calvin Ott. They're not doing anything. It's just you need to go get somebody strictly for the fact that you could walk into the season with George Pickens, a wide receiver 2, Roman Wilson, and Calvin Austin, and then a bunch of backups, and you could feel okay about that. You can't walk in there with George Pickens, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, and a bunch of backups. You're missing a key piece, major one on that offense, especially when it comes to the wide receivers. And I have a name that I want to talk about in a couple minutes here that I think the Steelers should go get, that he's holding out of OTAs. He's not Brandon Ayuk. Don't worry. He's not Cortland Sutton. Don't worry. But there's a name that I think makes some sense, that fills a hole that I'm kind of moving past the, you got to avoid a slot wide receiver. Just go get whoever's the best. Whoever you could go make work, go get that guy. I think the Steelers have a new option. But first, I want to talk about Naji Harris, who, every year we talk about this. You said this before the show. Every year, this is the biggest OTA conversation, seemingly out of nowhere. And this year, it just went back. Year one, it was Naji's super impressive. It's just Naji Harris. Year two, it was, man, dude, Naji's thighs are unbelievable. This guy, the quad master over here, next Saquon Barkley, looks crazy. This year, it's Naji looks slim, man. He looks lean. He looks much smaller. I think it's a good look for him. I think that at one point he maybe overtrained, got a little bit too slow, became a power back in an offense that you didn't really need so much power with. I think Naji is just physically gifted when it comes to his power and his ability to kind of be a bulldozing running back. I think you could slim down and add some speed there, add some versatility, and make it work. I don't know what he's down, but if I had to guess, he's got to be down 20 pounds. Like he looks pretty good. He looks very slim out there. I don't know. Slim Naji. Does it excite you? We overhyping once again Naji Harris's weight.
I mean, once again, we're talking about Naji Harris's weight at OTAs. It just seems like, cut, copy, paste, maybe change the headline a little bit, but That's where we're at in the middle of May. But it does excite me because I think a big part that we just talked about was, in the air game, Arthur Smith's going to have to get creative because he doesn't have a bunch of, all pro guys at his disposal. He might have one eventually in George Pickens, but again, George Pickens is not a guy that has got an all pro nomination yet in his career. So you have a lot of guys where you're going to have to get creative. If you can get Naji Harris out of the backfield, get him into some open space and have him be able to beat inside linebackers on routes, that's a huge advantage for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think if he did slim down a little bit for the express purpose of, hey, I want to be able to break away a little bit, I want to be able to get open a little bit against the second level, I think that's only going to be a positive thing for Naji Harris. And it's going to make him a little bit more versatile. Not that he's not already a versatile back. He's been that since he got in the league, but I think it gives him a little bit more as far as his repertoire as to what he can do and the impact that he can make for the Steelers this season.
Yes, I agree. I think a slim Naji allows you to do a lot more. I think a slim Naji probably takes a little bit of wear and tear off of his knees, which was a concern last season. I look at him and say, dude, if you're more versatile, if you're healthier, if you're feeling lighter, if you're more agile, there's nothing wrong here. Like, I get it. Ground and pound football. This is the Pittsburgh Steelers. You want to punch somebody in the mouth. Cool. There's a reason Jaylen Warren is super exciting to watch, and that's because he could do it all. And I think Naji Harris could do it all. Like, he came into the NFL and people were, I remember the one press conference when he said, I'm a wide receiver. Okay, you look like a fullback, pal. There's a difference here. And now he's slim. Now he's tall, he's slim, he's lean. I think it looks like he could do more. I don't know. It's early. Naji doesn't take many reps this time of year. It's not, Naji's not a guy that he's out there all the time. You could go a whole practice and be like, I forgot Naji Harris was on this team. Forgot he was here, this time of year, just because you're keeping him healthy. You're keeping those reps down. You want Naji to be here in January. You don't really care if he's here in May. That's where the Steelers are. But to be lean is, again, like you said, it's a good thing, man. You could get creative with a faster running back. And if Naji could be a wide receiver, if he could be a guy who's healthy and on the field all the time, if he could play more reps because of this, great, and you have no idea. But you want to talk about an observation, Naji looks good, and I'm excited about that because I think Naji's got a chip on his shoulder. The fact that he showed up to OTAs means he's ready to grind. If you're going to show up 20 pounds lighter, great.
Well, and here's the thing, too. They're talking about wanting to be an aggressive and physical team. Even if he's 20 pounds lighter, he's a physical runner anyway.
Oh, he's going to smoke it. Yeah.
He's not going to lose it. Losing 20 pounds and being more lean is not going to take away the fact that he is still an absolute monster, and especially in one-on-ones against defensive backs, he's still going to win that every single time.
Every single time. You're too big. And that's exactly what I said. Like, it's just, some guys are just naturally bulldozing running backs, That's just who they are. And that's who Naji is. He's a physical runner. And cool. If you want to find other ways to add some speed there, great. That's, you're not going to lose any power by dropping. There's a difference, 240 and 225. You're still running people over. That 175 pound cornerback doesn't really stand a chance when it comes to a guy like Naji Harris. So I agree with that. All right, let's transition back to the wide receivers here. I got a name for you. Okay. There's been everybody holding out from OTAs. Cortland Sutton, Brandon Ayuk. I was told this. You want to hear a crazy number? I was told Brandon Ayuk's asking for $35 million a year. $35 million a year. That is a wild number. That's a wild number. I'll give you a more realistic option. You want to talk about guys holding out from OTAs? Juwan Jennings over in San Francisco not showing up. He's on a 1-year deal, or was on a 1-year deal, is on a 1-year deal, I believe, this season with the 49ers, set to make like $4 million. Don't get me wrong. Juwan Jennings, you look up his stat book, it's tough. It's not really good. He had 5 touchdowns his rookie season. Hasn't really done a ton during the regular season since. Great playoff performer. I think he's worth more than 4.7 million or 4.5 or whatever it is. I look at him and say, cheap option, cheap contract, if you could extend him for 2 to 3 years. And I think a guy that's got more potential than he has in San Francisco, because quite frankly, it's got to be tough to come up with receptions with Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey. You could talk about the wide receivers. Oh, he's got to overcome those two. Let's not act like Christian McCaffrey isn't a wide receiver 1 on 31 out of 32 teams in the NFL. That the only one that he's not is probably not 2, because Justin Jefferson's wide receiver 1. There's 30 out of 32 teams. Christian McCaffrey is your wide receiver 1 and your running back 1. So got to be tough. I think you could go out and get a guy like Juwan Jennings, make an easy trade. 4th round pick, send him to Pittsburgh. You'll give him, I don't know, a 3-year deal worth, let's say, $6 million a year. That's great. That's as cheap as it gets in the NFL when it comes to wide receivers. And I think you're banking on potential. And if people are in on John Mechie, if people are in on, guys like that, Brandon Ayuk is still a guy on the rise. What's wrong with Juwan Jennings? What's wrong with taking a shot on a guy that I think has way more potential than he's shown, and definitely took a step up in the playoffs last year, which is something the Steelers would need. And I don't know if he's a wide receiver 2, but I think he's got the potential to be a pretty good wide receiver 2 in Pittsburgh. Juwan Jennings, what you think?
I think the thing that I look at now, and especially now that we're through the draft and we're through the majority of free agency, and you see what options are left out there, and you see where everybody stands with their organization, who's holding out, who's not. I think the idea of needing a wide receiver 2 specifically has kind of fallen off the side for me. I think when I look at it, I say, as I said earlier, you just need more talent. And let Arthur Smith scheme some of these guys open, because you have George Pickens, uber talented. You have some really talented running backs. You might be able to use Pat Freiermuth and kind of unlock some of his potential more. You have Roman Wilson, who has some potential there. You just need somebody that's a little bit more talented than Van Jefferson to be in that position. Somebody that you can scheme open in certain instances. Somebody that has actually been able to find success in a good offensive scheme, and Juwan Jennings has. Now, again, his numbers, not fantastic, but again, when he comes to Pittsburgh, is he going to be the 5th option behind 4 stars? No, he might be the 5th option behind 4 decently talented players that are all going to get the ball. It's not mandatory that you get the ball to all of these guys. We've seen that in the past. So, I don't hate him as an option. I think he's one of the better options now, simply because it's more realistic. But I think once you get out of they need a bona fide number 2 versus they just need to elevate the level of talent that they have, a guy like Juwan Jennings does make a lot of sense.
I agree. I agree. I think that's where the Steelers are. Again, realistic is the key word here. If you're looking for realistic, the Pittsburgh Steelers just need a wide receiver, an outlook that is real about saving the season, because potentially that's what it comes down to. Like, if you go into the season right now, and I said this to somebody yesterday watching practice, if you go into the season today with this wide receiver core, you're not winning a Super Bowl. You're not. You're going to struggle way more. People are going to be real upset. They're going to start blaming everybody else. Russ is in deep waters already. Arthur Smith's offense looks bad. Like, the wide receiver core is that bad. If you could add, it's just about adding anybody. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter what position they play, outside, inside. Just get wide receivers that are better than the wide receivers that you have already. And I think Juwan Jennings does that. Like, I think you could, what's his stat line? Is like 270 yards and a touchdown last season. Something terrible. You look at him, I think he's got more potential than that.
Yeah, last season he had 19 receptions for 265 yards and a touchdown, but he also had 111 yards in 3 playoff games. So it's
Yeah,
weird. It's whenever you use him, he's useful. They just didn't use him a lot during the regular season.
I think I think that's exactly where it is you need a guy who has potential. The Steelers don't have guys because that's their thing is you could bank on, Pat Fryermuth, you could bank on Calvin Austin. Those are real, like you're banking on guys with actual potential here, actual upside. Van Jefferson gave you all the upside. Quez Watkins gives you all the upside. Scotty Miller has peaked. These guys already, you know what you're getting. Juwan Jennings, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to get in better things. I think Juwan, and again, like it's not about finding a number 2, just like you said. It's just about finding somebody. It's about adding talent. And honestly, if you want to add 2 of them, if Juwan Jennings isn't enough, if that's how you look at it and you say, nah, not good enough, go add somebody else too. Like, what's the difference? If you go into the season and you got John Mechie and Juwan Jennings on your roster, it is a billion times better than what they have right now. And that's just, you need potential, you need upside. You don't have any of that if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think Juwan Jennings makes sense. Again, he's not Brandon Ayuk, but he's much more affordable than Brandon Ayuk. He's much more affordable than Cortland Sutton. He's much more affordable than Deebo Samuel. He's just that's where you have to look is if Brandon Ayuk's asking for $35 million, nobody's trading for him. Cortland Sutton's not getting traded for $20+ million a year. That's just not happening. Deebo Samuel's already 28 years old. You're not trading for Deebo Samuel. Why not trade for a guy who's worth $6 million and say, screw it, who cares? Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, who cares? We gave nothing up for him, and you signed him for $6 million. Burks is another one. Treylon Burks, that's a guy you want to add. Treylon Burks, cost nothing at all. Cool. He's got potential. He's got upside. You need potential and upside. Right now, you got a bunch of vets who don't have that left in their game, and it's very concerning. It's very concerning for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, we're 2 days in. We got a long road to go, but that is by far the most glaring yikes on this team 2 days in. The rest of the team looks good. Troy Fautano was talking about, I had a rough first 2 days of practice. You didn't notice. You don't know why? Because all eyes were on Van Jefferson dropping footballs and, Quez Watkins not looking. I mean, he looks tall, but hasn't really impressed. Scotty Miller, I haven't even seen out there. So that's where you are if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right. I'm done talking. Let's answer some questions.
Let's start with Sean LaRock. He asks, with Cam Hayward holding out and questions still remain of his return, who looks good at camp right now to potentially replace him if needed?
So defensive line is really tough this time of year because there are no pads on. You're hitting dummies and you're moving dummies, and cool, that looks great, but it's really tough to tell. Keanu Benton's the name. If Cam for some reason doesn't play in 2024, which would never happen, Cam's going to play in 2024 and things are going to be fine. It'd be Keanu Benton, which I have a ton of faith in Keanu Benton. There's no reason he should be playing nose tackle. Get him to a defensive end spot immediately. But it would be Keanu Benton. Isaiah Loudermilk too. He looks bigger, which is hard to do when you're already a massive human being, but he looks bigger. He looks impressive.
Let's go over to Pittsburgh Hornets, who asks, do you think Freiermuth might become the number 2 target for Smith because he loves to target the tight ends?
I do. I think Pat Freiermuth's in for a pretty big year. I think that he's going to have they're going to try to utilize him to where they take advantage of a lot of zone defenses and read those things. And Arthur Smith's a zone offense. And I think that works really well to Pat Freiermuth's strengths. So I think Pat's in for a big year. I do think he's the wide receiver 2 right now, but that's just not, you don't want that. You know what I mean? Like you want to have a wide receiver 2 who's an actual wide receiver 2, and then let Pat Freiermuth just be a dude, be a stud, be a star. And if that turns into Pat Freiermuth leads your team in receiving, awesome. But you should not bank on that going into the year. But I think Pat Freiermuth's going to have a big year.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you go back and look through at the Falcons receivers and leading receivers the last couple of years, it's Kyle Pitts is 1, then a receiver, then Michael Pruitt, and then it's Kyle Pitts is number 2, and then there's Jonnu Smith at number 4. He uses a lot of tight ends. So, I mean, for that instance, the question I have is, do you think and we've talked about it a couple times, do you think they actually use Darnell Washington in that manner? I know he's a blocking tight end, but with Arthur Smith being a guy that likes to use multiple tight ends, do you think he's going to use Darnell Washington, or do you think he's going to use a guy like Michael Pruitt in that instance to be that second receiving tight end?
I'll give you another name, Connor Hayward. That's who I think is going to be the guy. I think Connor Hayward gets used a lot in this offense in different ways, and I think that's how they're going to look at it. Is Pat's going to be the guy, Connor's going to be the number 2 receiving tight end. Darnell's going to get used a lot more in the passing game, definitely, but I don't like it. He's a red zone type of guy. Darnell. It's not an offensive thing. It is an offensive play call to a degree. Like Matt Canada, I don't even think he knew what a tight end did, but it's got some of that. But at the same time, Darnell's got a lot of work to do as a receiver. He's got a lot of work to do as a route runner, and he's very open about that. Like, I didn't work on this much at Georgia because I was pretty much just a tackle, and he's got a long way to go. But I think that they find ways to use him, as a big body in the red zone, that kind of stuff. I think Connor Hayward is going to be utilized a lot because Connor Hayward's a really reliable set of hands. He's not fast. He's, not super athletic, but he gets open and he's really reliable.
Let's move over and talk about Aaron's question here. He said, when would a trade happen if one was going to happen? Obviously, you talked about Juwan Jennings not at OTAs, but when would that trade or a trade of that similar stature end up happening?
Yeah, so I think it could happen any day now. I don't think it's going to happen any day now, but I think that from here on out, it is open. I think they wanted to see what they had first couple of days of OTAs. They saw what they had the first couple of days of OTAs, and now they're like, all right, let's start making phone calls. And it could happen in a month. It could happen in August. That it's not really their control when this thing goes down. But I think from today on, it could happen any day. Like it's just fully open to happen because I think every day that passes, they're going to realize more and more, all right, it's time to get another guy in here. And I think they'll start working on that.
Alex wants to know, do you think the running back situation stays the same, or does one take a more number 1 role, or does Patterson even get in the mix a little bit more?
I think Patterson does get in the mix a little bit. I think you are going to see some Patterson on offense. But I think this is still Naji Harris's backfield. Jaylen Warren's going to be the number 2. I see them splitting carries pretty evenly. Like this is a 50-50 split in 2024. I think last year is more like 60-40 Naji. I see more Jaylen Warren. I think there'll be games where Jaylen takes the first snap out of the backfield, but I think it's still like, Najee's going to be the starter and he's going to be the guy that they lean on in big moments. But I see a lot of Jaylen Warren, and I see a little bit of Patterson, of Cordero Patterson, but I don't know yet. He hasn't been at OTAs, so I'm not totally sure what the outlook is for him. And honestly, like a 33-year-old kick returner, you don't need to be at OTAs. So, we'll find out in minicamp.
Edgar wants to know, what player do you think will have a breakout this year?
Yeah, so I want to touch on that with this here because I think a lot of people kind of think that you talk down about the wide receivers and you ignore a name like Calvin Austin. You want to talk about a breakout guy? I think it's Calvin Austin. I think Calvin Austin is my breakout candidate for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I've talked to him about how good of an offseason he's had and, working with Deontay and his wide receivers coach, who's potentially the best wide receivers coach in the NFL, working with George Pickens a lot, just pretty much eat, sleep, and breathe football, which is what you want out of those guys. Calvin Austin's my breakout guy. I'm excited for it. If there's anybody on the Steelers roster that you should want to succeed, it's Calvin Austin. There might not be a better human being and a harder worker. I'm all about Calvin Austin. I think that if the offense could fit him and he could stay healthy, I expect big things from Calvin Austin.
Dominic has another question here pertaining to the wide receivers. Says, do you think the Steelers are comfortable with the current wide receiver core because they plan on being a run-first team? Once the box is stacked, the wide receiver core feels a lot different.
Yeah, I don't think they're comfortable. We talked about this for most of the show here is I don't think the Steelers are going to be comfortable with the wide receiver core. I think they came in here wanting to see what it was, but, very obviously we're looking for a wide receiver trade and just couldn't find one. I think that a move's going to happen. There's just no way, you can't go into the season looking the way that they are. And I would say a move's going to be made. They are not. I don't know that for certain. I haven't talked to Omar Khan. I haven't talked to Mike Tomlin about this. I haven't, I honestly, I don't even have a source right now saying this. This is straight guesswork. I would say the Steelers are not comfortable with their wide receiver core.
Sajan wants to know, do you think Michael Thomas is a really good trade for the Steelers? I'm just worried about his injury history.
Yeah, so Michael Thomas, first off, free agent, but I hear you. I don't know. Like, I don't think he's a better option than Juwan Jennings. I don't think he's a better option than Treylon Burks. I don't think he's a better option than John Mechie, just simply because he cannot stay healthy. And it's not like, oh, it's been 2 years. It's been 4 years. So at some point, you got to look at a guy and say, chances are you're not playing 18 games in a season. Steelers need somebody to play 18 games. That being said, if they brought him in and made a trade, I'd be all about it. All about it. My thing is this. I look at this like this. I think Calvin Austin's got a lot of potential to be like a wide receiver 3, utilized, whatever. I don't know where I put Roman Wilson right now. I think our expectations of him were higher than where he is currently, and I think you have to develop him a little bit. So I look at it and say, if George is your number one, if you could go get a Michael Thomas and somebody else, and then Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson, like you could utilize all 5 of those guys, try to keep some people healthy and rested while George is your superstar, and that's way better than what you got now, because essentially that's what they're looking to do, only with Quez Watkins, Van Jefferson, and Scotty Miller, which is not what you should be doing.
We got another question here about Calvin Austin. Broderick wants to know, do you think he's going to be a punt returner number 1 when the season begins this fall?
Yeah, I do. I think Cordero's just a kick returner, which is a good one. And, I'm very excited about the new kick return rules. I think they're very impressive. And I think it could really, like, you could have some very electric kick returns this season. Calvin Austin, I mean, I still look back to the Atlanta preseason game last year where Mike Tomlin had the biggest smile I've ever seen on that man's face. So I think Calvin's that guy. From what I've been told, they are very, very excited about what Calvin Austin could do as a punt returner this season. So I would expect him to be the punt returner 1.
Danny Smith cooking in the lab. Let's go over to Kenneth's question. Says, I haven't seen Warren at OTAs. What number is he wearing? Is Warren out there? And what have you thought of his performance so far?
We talking Jaylen Warren?
Yes.
Yeah, he's out there. He looks good.
Yeah.
He's still number 30. He's rocking. Him and Naji it's the same thing. This time of year, you're not going to waste snaps on Naji Harris and Jaylen Warren. You don't want injuries to happen to those two. So you're keeping them sidelined as much as humanly possible. There's a dude from Harvard. I wish I had the roster in front of me, but I don't, who has taken a lot of snaps, actually. Jonathan Ward's taken a lot of snaps. Edwards out of Georgia has taken a lot of snaps. They're going to test those guys more than they're going to give Naji and Jaylen runs, just because, like, Naji and Jaylen, they just got to learn the playbook, and they'll learn it. This time of year, everything's very vanilla. So I expect Jaylen to be fine. I can't say he's looked great because he hasn't done a lot, but I didn't expect Jaylen Warren to not look great. So I think he's going to be totally fine.
A name that's on a lot of Steelers fans' minds is Corey Trice. Aaron wants to know, how has Corey Trice been looking the last 2 days?
Yeah, so Corey Trice still isn't cleared for contact, so he's not doing team stuff, but he's doing individual stuff, and he looks smooth. Like, he looks like the brace is comfortable. We talked to him yesterday, and he said that this is nothing. Like, the second time you tear your ACL, it's way easier than the first, which I've actually heard that from a number of guys. I think Corey Trice has a lot of upside. He seems very confident. What I like about it is I talked to him yesterday, and I said, yo, what did being here all year do to you? Like, you didn't leave. A lot of guys get injured, they leave. They go train somewhere else. You stayed in Pittsburgh to make sure that you were in team meetings, that kind of stuff. He said, yeah, like Calvin, going off of what Calvin Austin did the year before, it's about, keeping that rookie year so that you could still develop while you're not on the field, so that you could learn the defense, so that you could learn from guys like Patrick Peterson and Joey Porter Jr. So he said that. And then he said, watching Joey last year, like, he feels like he's just as good as Joey, and those two could be really good. And they look the same. So, why not? But he said he's got a ton of confidence. So I'm excited to see him once we get into training camp. He said that's when he'll be cleared for everything. So we'll see come Latrobe.
Pittsburgh Hornets wants to know, how's the O-line looking, and what insights do you see at OTAs from the big guys up front?
Yeah, so it's tough to judge the offensive line. Troy Fautanu said that, he's had a rough couple days, and I'm like, I don't know how you could have a rough couple days when you're not doing anything, yeah. like the offensive line, there are no pads. You're not hitting anybody. It's set, hike. That's it. That's all you're doing as an offensive lineman. You're just standing up and making sure Russ could see over your head. That's all that they're doing. I like that yesterday Broderick was working on the left side. Troy was working on the left side. He's been switching it up a little bit. I think that the offensive line, I don't know, they look good. I think it's early to tell, but I think they have the pieces to look really good. And I think come training camp, we'll get more of a picture there, but I'm not down on the offensive line by no means.
Alex wants to know, hasn't watched in a while, are you guys Russ or Fields? And if Russ is your option, do you want to see a Wildcat package for Justin Fields this season?
I want to see a Wildcat package with Justin Fields and Russ either way, no matter who
Yeah.
I am. I want to see I want to see I want to see two quarterbacks on the football field at least once this season because, why not? At some point, just give me something to smile about and let's see if it works. I don't know. I'm not going to pick a guy yet. I think it's too early to pick a guy. I'll say over the last 2 days, I've become more and more of a Fields guy, but I think it's too early, and I'm going to hold back on that. I'm going to try not to make a big declaration on the quarterback until training camp, unless the next 3 weeks look crazy for one side or the other. But for right now, I'm going to keep it even keel. I think Justin Fields has had the better 2 days, but that's as much as I'm willing to put out there right now. But yes, the Wildcat package, give me Wildcat all day.
Adam Carson wants to know, why are you guys so down on Pat P, presumably Patrick Peterson? Wouldn't it be a good pick just for the safety depth and a mentor to a young cornerback group?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Patrick Peterson, like, if you want to sign him in July, I'm not against it, but I think that you give Corey Trice and Darius Rush a shot first and see what you got there. Those are two massive corners who spent all year last year here and probably developed a little bit. And I don't know. I'd just like to see what they could bring. Pat P cannot play safety. That's like, I think there's like a notion out there last year that Pat P should be playing safety. And I know he said a couple of times, like, I think that's my position. He can't tackle. That's you want to talk about my only issue with Patrick Peterson. It's that he cannot tackle, and you need to tackle to play safety. It is like the most important thing you could do outside of knowing what's going on the field, which he knows that. He's smart. I think he's a great mentor. I just think, and I know this is strictly football. I'm not talking off the field nonsense, and I get that you have to say that with this name, but Cam Sutton makes a billion times more sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He could play inside. He could play outside. He's physical. When he was here, I get it that he's gotten some trouble, but the Steelers loved this guy as a mentor and as a leader. And, I just think he makes way more sense. And I get people say like, oh, he stunk in Detroit. Pat P wasn't that great in Pittsburgh either. And, if you want to talk about a guy who could at least fill a role as a quality backup, I think Cam Sutton does more of it.
Last one we have as of right now is Carl Spackler, who wants to know, Pickens looks like he's added some size. Is that just the pictures, or did it feel that way in person as well?
I don't know if I've noticed a boost in George Pickens' size. I think that every guy coming in year 3 is like, year 2, everybody talks about the year 2 leap. Tomlin loves to talk about the year 2 leap. I think year 3 is when you start to kind of settle into who you are as a player. And I think George Pickens probably did add a couple of pounds. I haven't been, to be quite honest with you, I've been paying attention to everybody else so much that I haven't been paid just because why are you like, what am I watching in George? He's a star. I know that, like there's, and you catch him, when he does something crazy, you're like, there it is, but I try to focus on the other guys so far and haven't impressed me, but George, I don't know if he's put on some weight. I will say that he looks confident. I will say that I've talked to 3 or 4 people now who have said that George put in more work this offseason than maybe anybody in football. So you want to talk about being excited? You should be excited about George Pickens.
The last question we'll go with here is from Wims. He says, what is keeping the Steelers from pulling the trigger on a wide receiver other than the usual suspects out of Denver and San Francisco? Who is the best fit for offensive coordinator Arthur Smith's offense?
Oh, that's tough. I'd have to sit down and like really dive into film with these people. I think Brandon Ayuk is the best fit for Arthur Smith's offense just because like he's a physical dude who could play across the field and really run any route that you ask him to run. But if we're going to be realistic, guys, I don't know. I think Treylon Burks makes a lot of sense. Physical dude who could play on the outside, complements George Pickens well. You already have some route runners in Roman and in Calvin Austin, and I think that works out well. I think Treylon Burks has more upside than Van Jefferson, and that's where you're kind of looking. I think Juwan Jennings probably the same way. I don't know what John Mechie could bring. Like, I don't know what kind of game he plays because, to be honest, I didn't watch a ton of film on him when he was at Alabama, and I didn't watch almost any film on him from Houston. But he's a guy that seems like a quality route runner who could play inside and outside, and I think he's a good name too. I think it's more, I think Arthur Smith could fit an offense to his guys, not necessarily fit guys who have to be in his offense. That's, Steelers fans, man, we've been for 3 years. I don't know. This guy doesn't fit in Matt Canada's offense. A good offensive coordinator makes the offense fit to his players. So I would say any of those guys could probably adjust.
One final one here from Sean. He wants to know, at OTAs this year, has any defender mentioned if they are bothered by the new hip tackle rule? Obviously, he said, I would assume, yes, that's a huge topic of conversation for a lot of defensive players this year.
Yeah, so we actually haven't talked about that at all, like with guys, and I just think that we're so much has happened this offseason that it's tough to, add that to the list of questions in a scrum or something. And honestly, to be 100% honest with you, have not interviewed a defensive guy one-on-one in the last 2 days, only offensive guys. And that's on me. Probably should have done better, been a better journalist. I'll work on that today. I know that Patrick Queen was very upset about it. I know Cam Hayward was not pleased about it. I would imagine there's a lot of safeties that are not, and corners that are not happy about the situation. But I don't know, to be honest with you. I know the general consensus is this is not good for football, but at the same time, it's probably safer for football. I don't know. I think I think this is a sport that shouldn't be safe. So, take that as you will.
I've said it about 8 times, but we are going to finish with this one because it is a major story. What do you think about the draft coming to Pittsburgh, officially announced yesterday?
Yeah, I'm pumped about the draft coming to Pittsburgh. I think it's awesome. I'm not excited to have to drive in that traffic for a couple of days. So I'll say that one. But if you are somebody that's coming, okay, this is my thing. Get a room now, today, last weekend of April. Get it, because I'm telling you, those prices are going to be wild. The traffic is going to be wild. The city of Pittsburgh, I don't know what it is about Pennsylvania, okay, and maybe this is everywhere. I don't know, but in the state of Pennsylvania, their major cities tend to just have one way in and one way out, and that is the city of Pittsburgh. It's luckily there's one on both sides, but there's one way in, there's one way out. You got to go through it. It's going to be tough. It's going to be crowded. It's going to be awesome. I would imagine that they set it up right in front of the stadium or near the stadium so that everybody could go in and out of those bars on the North Shore, crowd the bridge, make it look super cool. I would imagine there's vendors all over the place. I think it's super cool. My advice is to get some freaking hotel rooms right now. And I got 2 couches. We're going to start the bidding at $1,000 a night. So, those are up for grabs, but I think it's cool.
There you go. Well, I think that's all we have. Let me double check, but I think that's all we have today. We got a couple more if you want to answer some.
I want to answer the Russ one. I think
that's the one I was looking at too.
Yeah.
So Michael wants to know, where does Russ have to take the Steelers to get a second contract?
Yeah. So I think he's, for one, got to win the starting job, which I think is still a little bit up for debate after the first 2 days of OTAs. I would say I don't know. He's got 2 things. It's twofold. It's one, him on the field, and it's one, him off the field. So on the field, he's got to lead this team to like a really good season, not a 10-win season. I'm talking maybe 11, 12. He's got to look like a guy who the Steelers could win a Super Bowl with. That's what he's got. Like, it's got to be 0 questions asked that Russell Wilson is the best quarterback the Pittsburgh Steelers could have right now. That's got to be it, it's difficult. That's not going to be easy to do. On the second side of that, he's got to be that good, and then he's got to be willing to take a cheap contract, because you're not keeping Russell Wilson in his mid-30s for $35 million a year. It's not happening. You keep him maybe for 30, 25, but it's got to be cheap. He's got to be willing to accept a cheap deal. I don't know if either of those are going to happen, and I think they extend Fields before the season. Like, I think that they look at Justin Fields and get a 2-year deal done with him before the season for, like, I don't know, $15 million a year or something like that, just to have that added protection, which, again, Russ is going to have to take a cheap deal if he's going to stay. But I would say those are the two factors in Russ getting a second deal.
All right, and that'll be a wrap.
That's us. That's it for us. With that said, guys, thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. We love these live streams. We'll keep doing them. I apologize that we were not here on Tuesday. I had a little bit of a wedding fiasco, emergency, we'll say, but we got things settled, so we're getting close. With that said, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much. Make sure to find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcast. And as we've been saying, please go check out our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips for even more of the show. With that said, we will be back tomorrow. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.